The cold wind blew through the streets that night, and people hurried by with their coats pulled tight. No one noticed the small figure sitting near the corner. A girl no older than 12, her name was Lena. She had been sitting there for hours, watching the people come and go, her thin hands tucked under her blanket, her stomach growling quietly. The city lights reflected in her tired brown eyes. She wasn't begging tonight, she had done that before, and it hurt her pride every time someone looked away or told her to leave. She just wanted something to eat, maybe some warm soup, maybe a small piece of bread. She hadn't eaten since morning, and the only thing she had left in her backpack was a broken comb and an old photograph of her mother. Across the street stood a grand restaurant, glowing with golden light. The sound of music and laughter drifted through its doors. The smell of roasted chicken and fresh bread made her heart ache. She could see rich men in suits, women in dresses, people smiling, eating and drinking. Everything in that place looked like another world, one she didn't belong to. Still, she couldn't take her eyes off it. Inside, a man played the piano softly, the melody floating through the cold air. Lena's heart stirred. She had once known that sound well. Her mother used to play in the streets back when life was still kind. Lena had learned to play by watching her small fingers copying every move. She remembered sitting beside her mother, both of them laughing when the music went wrong. Those memories were the only warmth she had left. Now she sat alone, her mother gone, the piano gone, and her life turned into a long stretch of hungry days and cold nights. She lived in a small shelter near the bus station, sometimes sweeping the floors for coins, other times singing for strangers who rarely stopped. Yet every night when the city went quiet, she dreamed of playing again. Not for money, but for her mother, for that feeling of love and peace she missed so much. As she watched the restaurant, the door opened, and a wave of laughter came out. A group of rich men stepped outside, their voices loud. One of them was older, dressed in a dark coat with gold buttons. His name was Mr. Dalton. He owned half the buildings on that street. Everyone knew him. He was a billionaire who loved showing his power. Lena didn't know his name, but she saw how people moved aside for him, how waiters rushed to open his car door. Her eyes followed a waiter carrying a tray of leftover food toward the trash bins. Her heart pounded. Maybe she could ask for a piece. Maybe they'd give her something instead of throwing it away. She gathered her courage and stood up, her legs shaky. She pulled her blanket around her shoulders and walked slowly toward the restaurant. Inside, everything sparkled. The floor shone like glass. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and the piano in the corner gleamed under the light. It was so beautiful it made her chest hurt. She stopped near the door, not daring to go in. A waiter saw her and frowned. "Go away," he said sharply. "This is not a place for you." Lena lowered her eyes. I just wanted some food," she whispered, her voice trembling before the waiter could push her out. Another voice interrupted. "What's going on here?" It was Mr. Dalton holding a glass of wine. His tone was half amused, half annoyed. The waiter straightened. "Just a street girl, sir." Trying to beg for food, Mr. Dalton looked at Lena, his eyes cold but curious. "Begging, are you?" he asked. Lena shook her head. "No, sir, I'm not begging. I just haven't eaten." He laughed softly. "Well, this isn't a charity, little one. You see that piano over there?" He pointed to the grand piano shining in the corner. "If you can play something worth listening to, maybe I'll buy you dinner. If not, you leave." The people around him laughed. A few clapped, thinking it was a joke. Lena froze. Her heart thumping fast, she looked at the piano and then at the floor. Her lips trembled. She hadn't touched a piano in years. Her fingers were cold and stiff, but the thought of food and the echo of her mother's song filled her mind. She took a slow breath. For a long moment she didn't move. Then she walked forward step by step, the sound of her shoes on the marble floor echoing in the silent restaurant. Every eye followed her, some with pity, some with mockery. She sat at the piano bench, her small hands trembling. She could feel their laughter behind her, but she didn't look back. She placed her fingers on the keys. They felt smooth and strange. Her reflection shimmered on the polished surface. For a second she remembered her mother's smile, her gentle voice saying, "Music isn't about rich or poor. It's about heart." Lena closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "I can do this," but when she pressed the first key, the sound came out harsh. Her hand slipped, and laughter filled the room again. She felt tears burn her eyes, her stomach twisted with shame. She wanted to run, but something deep inside her told her not to. She looked at the piano again, her heart pounding. The challenge had begun, and she was not going to give up. Outside, the wind howled through the street, but inside everything had gone still. No one knew that a simple act of cruelty was about to turn into something unforgettable, that a hungry girl with nothing left to lose would soon silence the laughter of the rich with the power of her music. That night, the story of Lena was about to begin. The soft hum of conversation filled the restaurant. Glasses clinked and laughter rolled across the tables. At the center of it all sat Mr. Dalton, the man everyone wanted to impress. His suit was sharp. His watch gleamed under the chandelier, and his smile was the kind only power could buy. Tonight was his night. He had just closed another deal worth millions, and his friends were toasting to him like he was a king. He leaned back in his chair, eyes half-lidded with pride. "To success," he said, raising his glass, his voice deep and confident. The others cheered. "To Dalton," they echoed. The air smelled of expensive wine, roasted duck, and victory. Then, in the corner of his eye, he noticed movement near the door. A small figure standing awkwardly, dressed in torn clothes, hair messy and face pale. It was Lena. She stood just beyond the golden light of the restaurant, her hands twisting the edge of her blanket. The warmth from inside brushed against her frozen cheeks. She could hear the laughter, smell the food. Her empty stomach growled so loudly she pressed her arms across it. She wasn't supposed to be here, but hunger had no rules. A waiter spotted her and frowned. "Hey!" "You can't be here," he snapped, stepping forward. The laughter continued behind him. People barely looked up. "Please," Lena whispered, her voice small but steady. "I'm not stealing, I just want something to eat, maybe leftovers," she added quickly, hoping that word might soften his tone. The waiter rolled his eyes. "We don't serve beggars," he muttered, and grabbed her arm to pull her out. But before he could, a sharp voice cut through the noise. "What's this about?" Everyone turned. Mr. Dalton was watching with an amused expression, his glass still in his hand. The waiter froze. "Sir, it's nothing. Just a street girl trying to get food." Mr. Dalton's lips curved into a smirk. "A street girl?" he repeated as if the words themselves were funny. "How interesting." He stood up slowly, all eyes followed him. The room went quiet. He walked toward Lena, his shoes tapping on the marble floor. The girl looked up, her heart pounding. He stopped in front of her, towering over her. "Tell me, little one, you're hungry?" Lena nodded, her voice trembling. "Yes, sir." He tilted his head, pretending to think. "And why should I feed you?" His tone was teasing, almost cruel. "Do you have any talent? Any skill? Or do you just stand outside places hoping someone takes pity on you?" His friends chuckled behind him. Lena's throat tightened. She wanted to look away, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. I can play the piano," she said softly. The laughter grew louder. "The piano?" one of the men said, nearly spilling his drink. "Now that's something I'd like to see." Mr. Dalton's eyes gleamed with interest. "Well then," he said, gesturing toward the shining black grand piano near the corner of the restaurant. "We do have one right here if you can play it, really play it. I'll buy you dinner. The best meal you've ever had. But," his voice hardened slightly, "if you can't, you walk out of here and never come back." Lena's heart skipped. She looked at the piano. It was beautiful, almost magical, but she hadn't touched one in years. Her hands trembled inside her blanket. The people in the room were whispering now, some curious, some laughing, a few shaking their heads. She could hear bits of their words. "This'll be funny. Poor thing. She'll embarrass herself." Mr. Dalton stepped back and motioned for her to go ahead. "Well, don't keep us waiting," he said. His tone light but his eyes sharp. Lena took a small step forward, her feet heavy as stone. The floor felt endless. Her reflection followed her across the polished surface. She could hear the faint music playing from the speakers fade into silence. Even the waiters had stopped moving. She reached the piano and stopped. Her small hand hovered over the seat. She looked back once, saw all the eyes watching her, the laughter barely hidden. Then she sat down, her blanket slipping off her shoulders. Her hands were red and cold, but she placed them gently on the keys. They felt smooth and strange. Her heart was racing so fast she could hardly breathe. For a moment she just stared at the piano. The smell of varnish, the shine of the ivory keys, it all brought back flashes of her mother, the sound of street music, the warmth of hands guiding hers. "Play with feeling," her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Not fear." Lena closed her eyes and whispered to herself. "I can do this." She pressed one key, just one. But the sound came out flat and shaky. Someone snorted behind her. "She doesn't even know where middle C is." Another laughed. She tried again, but her fingers slipped. The notes clashed, harsh and broken. The laughter grew louder. Tears filled her eyes. She bit her lip hard to stop them. Mr. Dalton chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, I guess dinner is off the table," he said, turning to walk away. But Lena didn't move. Something inside her refused to stop. She looked at her trembling hands, then at the piano again. Her breath hitched, and she whispered, "No, not yet." She wiped her face quickly and took a deep breath. Somewhere deep inside she could still hear her mother's melody, soft and gentle, calling her back. She straightened her back. Her hands steadied. The crowd had gone quiet again. Curious, a few whispered. "Is she trying again?" Lena didn't hear them. She closed her eyes and let her fingers fall. This time the sound that came out was soft and pure. Like a whisper of hope, the laughter faded. The restaurant fell silent. Mr. Dalton turned, his smirk fading. He didn't know it yet, but the game he started for fun was about to change everything. The hungry girl he mocked was about to show him something money could never buy. The true sound of beauty, born not from wealth, but from pain and courage. The night was no longer his celebration. It was about to become hers. The restaurant had gone completely still. Every fork, every laugh, every whisper hung frozen in the air. A few seconds ago, people had been laughing. Now they were watching, curious, amused, expecting another mistake. Lena's thin fingers hovered above the piano keys. Trembling like leaves in the wind, her breath came in small gasps. She could hear her own heartbeat echoing inside her ears. The sound of fear. Mr. Dalton leaned against the nearest table, his arms crossed, that same smug smile on his face. To him, this was still a game. "Go on, little pianist," he said, his voice low and sharp. "Show us what you can do." His friends chuckled. One of them whispered, "She'll hit a few wrong notes and cry," another replied. "Better than the circus," they laughed again. Thinking it was all a joke, Lena didn't move. Her mind was spinning. She could feel everyone's eyes burning into her back. She wanted to disappear. Her stomach hurt. Her hands felt heavy. The polished surface of the piano reflected her scared face. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was a girl from the street, sitting in a palace of light and money. She didn't belong. Her first note came out shaky, weak. The sound broke like glass. Someone snorted from the tables. Another chuckled loudly. "Told you," he said. "She doesn't know what she's doing." Mr. Dalton smiled thinly and took a sip of his wine. "Well," he said, "at least she tried," but Lena didn't stop. She pressed another key, then another. The sounds came out wrong again. Harsh and scattered, her hands were stiff, her fingers slipping across the keys. The room filled with quiet laughter, soft but cruel, each giggle cutting deeper than hunger ever could. She looked down, her eyes stinging. The piano blurred through her tears. She whispered to herself, "I can't." And in that moment, everything around her disappeared. She was no longer in the fancy restaurant, no longer surrounded by people who didn't care. In her mind, she was back on a street corner, years ago, with her mother beside her. Her mother's warm smile and gentle hands guiding hers. "Don't rush," her mother's voice said softly in her memory. "Feel the music, it's part of you. The smell of rain, the sound of coins dropping in a cup, the echo of her mother's laughter." All of it came rushing back. Her mother had died when she was just 9, but the music hadn't left her. It had just been buried under years of pain and silence. Now in front of this grand piano in a world that didn't want her, it came back like a forgotten dream. She wiped her tears quickly, her hands still shaking, and whispered, "For you, Mom." The restaurant was still laughing when Lena suddenly started again. Her fingers moved slowly at first, finding the notes one by one. This time they sounded different, gentler, deeper, real. A small melody began to form, faint but steady. The laughter started to fade. People began to turn their heads, wondering what was happening. The waiter nearest to her frowned, then froze. The sound filled the room like a breath of air after a long storm. Her fingers danced, awkward at first, then graceful, as if her body remembered what her heart had forgotten. The piano responded to her touch, the notes rising and falling. Soft and strong, Mr. Dalton set his wine down, his eyes narrowing, his smile gone. His friends stopped whispering. One of them leaned forward. "Wait, she can actually play," he said quietly. Lena wasn't looking at them. Her world was somewhere else now. She had fallen into the music, her pain, her hunger, her loneliness, every bit of it poured out through her hands. The melody changed, grew faster, more alive. Her fingers no longer trembled. They flew. Her eyes were closed, her face calm. For the first time that night, she wasn't afraid. She was free. She wasn't playing for money, not for food, not for approval. She was playing because she had to, because the music inside her had finally found its way out. People watched in silence, unable to look away. The waiters had stopped walking. Even the kitchen door had gone still. The laughter that once filled the room was replaced by a strange quiet, the kind that only beauty can bring. One woman at a table wiped her eyes without knowing why. Another man whispered, "That's incredible." The song rose higher, the sound echoing through the restaurant like wind through glass. The piano seemed alive, glowing under the light, the sound filling every corner. Lena's thin arms moved with surprising strength, her face calm but glowing with something powerful, something no one could name. Mr. Dalton's eyes stayed locked on her, his smirk gone completely. In his chest something stirred, something he hadn't felt in years. Maybe admiration, maybe shame. He had built his life on money and pride, on thinking people like her were beneath him. But this girl, this homeless child, was creating something that no amount of wealth could buy. When the final note came, it was soft, delicate, like a whisper. It hung in the air for a few seconds before fading away. The silence that followed was heavy. No one moved. Then, slowly, someone started clapping, then another and another. Soon the whole restaurant was on its feet, applauding, cheering, some people even shouting, "Bravo!" Lena sat frozen, her hands still resting on the keys, tears slipping down her cheeks. She looked up, confused. She had expected them to laugh again. Not this. Mr. Dalton stood slowly, staring at her with wide eyes for once in his life. He didn't know what to say. She looked at him, her lips trembling but smiling. She whispered quietly, "Did I earn my dinner now?" The billionaire who once laughed at her couldn't speak. He just nodded slowly, feeling something deep in his chest break open. For the first time in years, he felt small. Outside, the night was still cold. But inside the restaurant, the warmth wasn't from chandeliers or wine anymore. It came from something far greater, the music of a girl who had nothing, but gave everything. The night that began as a cruel joke had just turned into a miracle, and no one in that room would ever forget it. The last note still hung in the air like a ghost that refused to fade. The restaurant was silent except for the faint hum of the piano. Lena's small fingers stayed resting on the keys, her chest rising and falling as if she had just run a long race. Her eyes were glassy with tears, but they weren't from sadness this time. They were from something deeper, something she hadn't felt in years. For the first time since her mother's death, Lena had played without fear, without hunger controlling her hands, without shame tightening her throat. She had played like she used to when her world was whole, when music meant love, not survival. But as the applause echoed around her, the sound suddenly turned distant, far away, like it was coming from another world. Her vision blurred, and she wasn't in the restaurant anymore. She was somewhere else, somewhere warmer, brighter. A memory rising from the corners of her mind. She saw herself as a little girl, no older than 7, sitting on a wooden stool in a crowded street beside her mother. The smell of roasted corn and rain filled the air. People hurried past, some dropped coins into a tin cup. Others didn't look at all, but none of that mattered. Because her mother was smiling, her mother's name was Elena, and she was the kind of woman whose smile could make you forget how cold the world was. Her hands moved over the broken keys of an old street piano, worn but still alive, her voice soft as she hummed along. "Listen, Lena," her mother had said that day. "Music isn't just sound. It's a way to speak when the world won't listen." Little Lena nodded eagerly, her small fingers pressing random keys, laughing when the notes didn't fit. "I made a mistake." She giggled. Her mother laughed too. "No, my love, there are no mistakes in music. Just chances to start again." Lena remembered how people used to stop and listen, even the tired ones, even the angry ones. Her mother's music made them smile. Sometimes a stranger would drop a loaf of bread instead of money. Sometimes a flower. Her mother would thank them with a bow and then hand the food to someone hungrier than they were. That was the kind of person she was, kind, stubborn, and full of light until the day the coughing began. At first it was small, just a cold. But then it got worse, the sound rough and sharp. Lena remembered the nights when her mother still tried to play, even when her voice was weak. "Music heals," she had whispered once. "Maybe if I play, the pain will stop." But it didn't. The memory darkened. Lena saw herself sitting beside her mother on a rainy night, the piano covered with a plastic sheet, her mother's hands trembling, her breath shallow. "Mom," she had cried, "please stop playing, we can rest." But her mother smiled weakly and touched her cheek. No, sweetheart, I promised I'd teach you one last song. That night, under the rain, her mother taught her Moonlight Sonata, the same song Lena had played tonight. Her mother's voice was barely a whisper as she said, "When I'm gone and the world feels cold, play this and I'll be there right beside you." The memory shattered into the present. Lena blinked hard, gasping, tears spilling freely now. The applause around her had faded again. People were still clapping, but she could barely hear them. She looked down at her shaking hands, whispering, "I played it, Mom. I really did," from across the room. Mr. Dalton watched her, his expression unreadable. His friends were still stunned, some whispering, others simply staring. No one dared to laugh now. He felt something strange, an ache he hadn't felt since his own childhood. Back before his life became about profit and pride. He didn't understand it, but he couldn't look away from the girl. Lena slowly stood from the piano bench. Her knees weak, she turned toward the crowd. Unsure of what to do, part of her wanted to run. Part of her wanted to disappear into the street again. But another part, one that belonged to her mother, told her to stay. Mr. Dalton stepped closer, his voice softer now, almost human. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked. Lena looked up, blinking away her tears, her voice quiet. "My mother taught me. She used to play in the streets." He nodded slowly. "She must have been very talented." "She was," Lena said, a faint smile on her lips. "She said music can feed you even when food can't." Her words hit him like a knife wrapped in silk. For a moment he didn't respond. He simply stared at her, seeing not a beggar anymore, but something else, someone who had more dignity than most people he knew. Behind them, a waiter approached carefully. "Sir," he whispered, "should I bring her something to eat?" Mr. Dalton didn't answer right away. He was still thinking, still fighting the lump in his throat. Then he finally nodded. "Yes, bring her the best we have." Lena blinked in surprise. "You mean it?" she asked softly. Mr. Dalton nodded. "Yes, you earned it." When the food came, a warm plate of roasted chicken and soup, Lena's hand shook as she picked up the spoon. Her stomach growled so loud the people near her smiled. But before eating, she looked once more at the piano, the soft reflection of her mother in her mind. She whispered, "Thank you, Mom," before taking her first bite. As she ate, Mr. Dalton sat down nearby, not at his table of friends, but across from her, watching in silence. He had fed hundreds through donations, funded charities, built shelters, but none of it had ever made him feel the way this moment did, the way a single act of grace had cracked open his pride. Outside, the city was still cold. Cars passed by, people hurried home. But inside that restaurant, something had changed. A girl who once begged for scraps was now the one who made everyone feel alive. And a man who had mocked her was beginning to remember what kindness felt like. And as Lena finished her meal, her eyes drifting back to the piano, she smiled faintly, because she could almost hear her mother's voice again, whispering through the music. "See? I told you, my little one, someday the world will listen." The rain outside had started again, a soft drizzle tapping against the restaurant windows. But no one inside cared. All eyes were still on Lena, the little homeless girl who had just silenced a room full of wealthy strangers with her music. She sat at the piano, her head bowed, her small hands resting still, as if afraid to move and break the magic she had created. The applause had faded, but something even stronger lingered in the air. Awe. People whispered to one another, some in disbelief, some with tears in their eyes. Others just stared, unable to explain what they had just witnessed. Music like that didn't come from training or money. It came from pain, from soul, from somewhere deeper than most people dared to feel. Mr. Dalton stood still, his wine untouched, his proud smirk gone completely. For once in his life, he didn't know what to say. The sound of her music still echoed in his chest, the way her fingers had danced across the keys, her face lit with a strange, pure glow. She had played like she wasn't just performing. She was becoming the song. His friends murmured behind him, one whispered, "That girl, she's incredible," another said softly, "She made me cry." The same people who had laughed minutes ago now spoke as if they were in a church. Even the waiters stood frozen, afraid to break the silence. Then Lena slowly turned her head toward them, her eyes glistening but calm. "Did I play well enough?" she asked softly, her voice shaking a little. The question was innocent, honest, and it struck everyone like lightning, because she wasn't looking for praise. She was just hoping for food. Mr. Dalton finally stepped forward, his shoes clicking softly on the floor. His voice lower now. "More than well enough," he said, his usual sharpness gone, replaced with something gentler. You played beautifully, Lena blinked. Unsure if he was serious, her body still tense. Does that mean... She paused. I can eat? She whispered the last word as if afraid it might vanish. Mr. Dalton nodded once. You've earned it. He turned to the waiter. Bring her the best meal we have and make it quick, his voice firm. But softer than before, the waiter hurried away. People murmured again, this time in approval. Someone even clapped quietly. Lena stood from the piano slowly, her knees weak. She had never been inside a place like this before, never felt this much attention. She could feel everyone's eyes following her as she sat at a small corner table, her heart beating wildly. She didn't know whether to smile or cry. She just waited, trembling hands folded in her lap. When the waiter returned, he placed a tray before her. Roasted chicken, warm bread, creamy soup, and a glass of juice that sparkled like gold. Lena's eyes widened. Her mouth fell open slightly. She had never seen so much food just for her. The smell made her dizzy. She picked up the spoon carefully, her hands shaking. She took one small sip of soup, and for the first time in days, warmth spread through her chest. Her stomach growled loudly. People nearby chuckled softly, not mocking this time, but touched. She took another spoonful, then another until she couldn't stop. Mr. Dalton watched her quietly from a few steps away, something heavy stirring inside him. He had seen desperation before. He had seen beggars on streets and poor faces on charity posters, but none of it had ever looked like this. This was real, human, raw, the way she smiled between bites, the way she tried to eat slowly but couldn't. It broke something in him. He finally sat down across from her, his glass of wine forgotten. What's your name? He asked softly. She looked up, surprised. Lena, she said with a small smile. Just Lena. He nodded. And your parents? He asked gently. Her smile faded. She looked down. Her spoon stopped moving. My mother used to play too, she said quietly. She taught me everything. She said music could feed you when food couldn't. Her eyes glimmered with tears again. But she got sick and I couldn't buy medicine. I tried to play in the streets, but people just walked past. The man's throat tightened. He leaned forward slightly, his voice quiet. And your father? She shook her head. I never knew him. Her tone was simple, like it didn't hurt anymore. But the way her eyes dropped told another story. Mr. Dalton exhaled slowly, staring at the girl who had humbled a room of the richest people in town. He had spent his life chasing numbers, deals, reputation. And yet, sitting across from this hungry child, he felt poorer than ever. You said your mother played, he said after a pause. What was her name? Elena, Lena said softly. She used to say music is just love that people can hear. For a long moment, Mr. Dalton didn't respond. The words echoed in his head. Music is love that people can hear. He stared at the girl again. Her dirty coat, her tangled hair, her tired eyes, and then realized that somehow she had just given him more than any deal ever had. He finally said, You have a gift, Lena. A real one? She smiled shyly. My mom said the same. He smiled too. For the first time that night, a real smile. Not one meant to impress or hide. She was right, he said quietly. Lena finished her food, leaning back. Full for the first time in days, she looked at the piano again, the light from the chandelier reflecting off its surface. Can I play again? She asked suddenly. Dalton blinked, surprised. You want to? She nodded eagerly. Yes, but this time, not for food, just for her. She pointed to her heart. He nodded slowly. Of course, she walked back to the piano. This time, no fear, no challenge, only peace. She sat down and closed her eyes. Her fingers moved gently, and the sound that came out was softer, slower, but even more beautiful. The melody filled the air like a prayer. People listened again, no one spoke. Mr. Dalton watched her with quiet awe, realizing that he wasn't just looking at a hungry girl anymore. He was watching a miracle, a reminder of everything he had forgotten. And as the music filled the room once more, Lena's face glowed under the golden lights. Her heart finally calm. Her mother's song alive again, this time not for survival but for love, and somewhere deep inside, Mr. Dalton knew. This night had changed them both forever. The night had melted into a gentle silence, the kind that makes people forget to breathe. Lena's final note drifted through the golden light of the restaurant and dissolved into the air like mist. For a few seconds no one spoke, no one moved. Even the clinking of glasses had stopped. She sat at the piano with her eyes closed, her fingers still resting on the keys, the faintest smile on her lips. Mr. Dalton stood near the bar, frozen in place, his mind a storm of thoughts. This was supposed to be a night of laughter, a celebration of success, but somehow a small girl had turned it into something else entirely. He had seen countless performances in his life, famous pianists, expensive concerts, but none of them had touched him like this. Her music wasn't perfect, but it was real. It carried pain, hope, love, and something he hadn't felt in years. Truth. When Lena finally opened her eyes, she looked around shyly, as if afraid to find the laughter back again, but instead she saw faces softened by wonder, eyes shining with emotion. Some people were clapping quietly, others were simply staring, lost in the spell she had cast. Mr. Dalton exhaled slowly, setting his glass down without realizing he had been holding it too tightly. He walked toward her, his footsteps echoing against the marble, every sound sharp in the stillness. When he reached her, she looked up nervously, expecting anger or another test. But his face wasn't cold anymore, it was uncertain, softer, almost human. He spoke quietly. "That was extraordinary." Lena blinked, unsure how to respond. "Thank you, sir," she whispered, her voice still trembling. "I only wanted to play one more time for my mom." He tilted his head. "Your mother?" he repeated, his tone gentle. "You mentioned she taught you." "Yes," Lena said, her eyes glimmering. "She used to play in the streets. She said music could make people feel less lonely, even if they didn't know why. She taught me that when you play, you tell your story, even if no one listens." Mr. Dalton felt his throat tighten. He looked at her small hands, the same hands that had just created something powerful enough to hush a room of cynics. He cleared his throat, trying to keep his composure. "You've done more than make people listen, Lena. You've reminded them to feel." Lena tilted her head slightly, not sure what he meant. I wanted them to hear her," she said softly, placing a hand over her chest. "When I play, I can feel her here, like she's not gone." The man nodded slowly, something breaking inside him. It was strange, how a child who had nothing could speak words that felt wiser than anything money could buy. His eyes drifted toward the grand piano, shining under the warm light. He thought of how he had once loved music too, back before life became numbers and contracts. He sighed quietly. "You know," he said, almost to himself, "when I was your age, I wanted to be a pianist." Lena's eyes widened. "You did?" He smiled faintly. "Yes, my mother wanted me to learn. I took lessons, but when my father died, I had to take over his business. Music became a luxury, something I no longer had time for." Lena looked at him curiously. "Did you ever play again?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "No, I stopped. I told myself it was childish." She looked at him for a moment, then said something that would stay with him forever. "Maybe that's why you forgot how to be happy." The words hit harder than she knew. For a moment he just stared at her. The restaurant, the lights, the people, all faded away. He saw himself reflected in her eyes, a man who had everything except peace. He looked away, pretending to smile. "You're smarter than you look," he said quietly. She smiled shyly. "My mom used to say that too." They both laughed softly, the tension melting. It was the first genuine laugh Mr. Dalton had shared in a long time. Then he straightened. "Lena," he said, his tone turning thoughtful, "what would you say if I helped you study music? Properly, with teachers, with a piano of your own?" Her mouth fell open. "You mean, like lessons?" He nodded. "Yes, real lessons. Real instruments. You have a gift, and gifts like that shouldn't be wasted on the street." For a second, she just stared at him, unsure if this was another test or joke. Her heart pounded. "But I don't have money, sir," she whispered. He smiled gently. "Then it's a good thing I do." Tears filled her eyes. She covered her mouth with both hands. "You'd really do that for me?" He nodded. Yes, but on one condition. She blinked. What condition? You have to promise you'll keep playing from your heart. Not for fame or wealth, but for what truly matters. She nodded quickly, tears spilling down her cheeks. I promise, she said softly. I'll never forget why I play. Mr. Dalton looked at her and smiled, a real warm smile that softened the lines on his face. Good, he said. Then let's start by getting you something warm to wear. The waiter appeared again with a clean coat that had been kept for emergencies, and Dalton gently draped it over her shoulders. We'll fix the rest tomorrow, he said. Tonight you've already done more than enough. As Lena looked around, the restaurant no longer felt like a strange, cold place. It felt safe, almost like home. People smiled at her as she passed, and one woman even handed her a small bunch of flowers from her table. For the pianist, she said kindly. Lena clutched the flowers close, her heart glowing. She looked once more at the piano, the same one that had humiliated her hours ago. Now it gleamed like an old friend. She whispered quietly, "Thank you." Outside, the city lights shimmered against the wet pavement. The air smelled of rain and promise. Mr. Dalton walked beside her as his driver brought the car around. "Where do you sleep?" he asked. "Near the bus station," she admitted softly. "It's not so bad when it's not raining." He frowned. "Not anymore," he said firmly. "You'll stay somewhere safe tonight." As the car pulled away, Lena looked out the window at the glowing city. She had walked those same streets cold and hungry, unseen by everyone, but tonight was different. Tonight someone had finally seen her, and not as a beggar, but as something beautiful. Inside the car, Mr. Dalton stared out the opposite window, silent, his thoughts racing. He had come to dinner to celebrate himself. But he was leaving humbled, changed by a girl who reminded him what it meant to feel. Neither of them spoke, but both knew that something extraordinary had begun. One found purpose, the other found hope, and somewhere in between. The world felt a little less cold. The morning sun crept through the city like gold spilling over glass. The streets sparkled after the rain, and the air carried that clean scent that only comes after a storm. Lena sat in the back seat of a long black car, her fingers pressed against the window, her eyes wide with wonder. She had never ridden in a car this beautiful before. The leather seats felt softer than her old blanket, and the city outside looked brand new from this view. Next to her sat Mr. Dalton, unusually quiet, his phone forgotten for once. He watched the city go by too, but his mind wasn't on his business meetings or the stock market. It was on the small girl beside him. The same girl who had changed everything for him in one night. Her music still echoed in his head, each note replaying like a memory he didn't want to fade. When they stopped at a red light, he glanced at her and smiled faintly. "You didn't sleep much, did you?" Lena shook her head. "I was afraid I'd wake up and it would all be a dream," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "I've had a lot of dreams that disappeared in the morning." He looked at her for a long second, the words hitting him harder than she knew. "This one won't disappear," he said quietly. "Not if I can help it." The car pulled up in front of a tall glass building, not one of Dalton's office towers, but a place that glowed with a softer warmth. The golden sign read, Harmony Music Foundation. Inside were classrooms, instruments, and children practicing songs. The sounds of pianos, violins, and laughter filled the halls. Lena's eyes widened. She turned to him. "What is this place?" Dalton smiled. "It's one of my charities. We fund music education for children, but I've never actually been here myself." She blinked, surprised. "Never?" He shook his head with a guilty laugh. "I just signed the checks. I didn't think it mattered." He paused, looking at her. "But after hearing you play, I realized how wrong I was." As they stepped inside, a teacher greeted them warmly. "Mr. Dalton, what a surprise," she said, her voice full of respect. "And who's this lovely young lady?" Dalton placed a gentle hand on Lena's shoulder. "This," he said with a proud smile, "is our newest student." The teacher smiled at Lena. "Welcome, sweetheart. Do you like the piano?" Lena nodded shyly. It's my favorite thing in the world. The woman's eyes softened. Then you'll fit right in. Dalton watched as Lena was led into a room filled with children her age, some tuning violins, others tapping drumsticks. In the center stood a bright new piano. Polished and ready, he saw her stop and stare at it, her small hands twitching as if calling to touch it. The teacher gestured. "Go on, dear." Lena sat down slowly, her reflection shining in the glossy surface. She ran her fingers across the keys, feeling their warmth. A few of the other students watched her curiously, whispering to each other, but when she began to play, just a few gentle notes, the whole room went silent. Even in daylight, the magic was still there. Her touch carried a softness that no teacher could teach. She didn't play perfectly, but she played honestly, and that was what made everyone stop and listen. Dalton stood in the doorway, arms folded, trying not to show how emotional he felt. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about profit or power or winning. He was thinking about purpose, about what truly mattered. After the class ended, Lena ran up to him, eyes bright. "Did you hear me?" she asked eagerly. "I didn't make too many mistakes, right?" He chuckled softly. "You played beautifully, Lena, just like last night." She grinned, then looked around shyly. "Do you really think I can be good enough one day? Like the people on TV?" He bent down so they were eye level, his tone sincere. "You already are. You just don't know it yet." Lena threw her arms around him suddenly, and though it caught him off guard, he didn't pull away. It had been years since anyone had hugged him, truly hugged him, not for attention or gain, but from pure gratitude. His eyes burned as he patted her back gently. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me." That night, after dropping her off at a safe home arranged by the foundation, Dalton sat alone in his car, staring at the city lights. He couldn't shake the feeling that this small girl had done something no business partner, no award, no deal had ever done. She had reminded him that life wasn't meant to be measured by what you own, but by what you give. The next day, he returned to the foundation with a new idea. He gathered the staff and said, "I want to expand this place. I want every kid like Lena, every child with talent but no home, to have a chance, no matter where they come from." The teachers exchanged surprised looks. One asked, "You mean make this nationwide?" Dalton nodded. "Yes, and I want Lena to be our first scholarship student." Meanwhile, Lena practiced every day, her fingers growing faster, stronger, her music spreading through the building. Teachers would pause in the hall just to listen. She had become the heart of the school, the one everyone looked to for inspiration. Weeks passed and Mr. Dalton visited often, sometimes just to hear her play, sometimes to talk. He had begun to smile more, laugh more, even spend time helping the other children. People in his company noticed he was changing too, softer, calmer, more human. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Lena finished another song and looked up to see him standing by the door. She ran over and said excitedly, "I learned a new one. It's called Hope. Want to hear it?" He smiled and nodded. "I'd like nothing more." She sat down again, the first note gentle, full of warmth, and as the music filled the room, he realized something. She wasn't just playing anymore. She was healing herself, healing him, healing everyone who listened. And as he watched her under the soft golden light, he understood something for the first time in his life. Some people build empires of money, but others, like her, build empires of the heart. Hers was made not of steel and glass, but of music and courage, and it would last much longer than his ever could that night. He looked up at the sky and whispered to himself, "Thank you, Lena, for reminding me what it means to live." A year passed like a melody that never lost its tune. The seasons changed, but Lena's life no longer drifted between hunger and hope. She had become something the world could finally see. A miracle born from the streets, a girl whose music carried both sorrow and light. Her name began to spread beyond the foundation walls, whispered first by teachers, then by musicians, until one day, it reached the world outside. It was spring now. The air smelled of flowers and new beginnings. Banners fluttered in front of the city's grand concert hall, the letters shining in gold. The young prodigy, Lena, live in concert. Inside, the hall shimmered with warm lights, seats filled with people from all walks of life, elegant couples in gowns, students clutching notebooks, and even a few of the waiters from that night in the restaurant who had come to see the girl who changed their hearts. There was excitement in the air, but also something softer. Admiration, respect. Behind the heavy red curtain, Lena stood in her simple white dress, her fingers tracing the smooth surface of the piano waiting on stage. Her hair was tied back neatly, her shoes polished. Yet despite the fancy hall and glowing lights, she still felt like that same girl sitting by the restaurant window. Hungry but dreaming, only this time, she wasn't hungry for food. She was hungry to share her story. Mr. Dalton stood beside her, his suit as sharp as ever. But his eyes warmer now, more alive. He looked at her with quiet pride. "Are you nervous?" he asked softly. Lena smiled faintly. "A little," she admitted. "But when I play, I won't be," he nodded. "That's because the piano knows you," he said, his voice gentle. "You two speak the same language." She looked up at him, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever think about that night? When I first played in your restaurant?" He chuckled softly. "Every day," he said. "It reminds me how wrong I was, and how right you were to never give up," she smiled. "If you hadn't challenged me, I might never have found my voice again." He shook his head. "No, Lena, it was always inside you. You just needed someone to listen." The stage manager gave a signal, and it was time. The lights dimmed. The murmur of the crowd faded into silence. Mr. Dalton gave her one last nod. "Go show them who you are." Lena took a deep breath, her heart racing but steady. She stepped out into the light, and for a moment, she couldn't see anything, just a blur of faces, like stars scattered across the dark. Then the applause started, soft at first, then swelling like waves. She sat at the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. The hall waited. The silence stretched thin, and then she began to play. The first notes were soft, gentle as a whisper. The melody flowed like water, slow and clear. It was her mother's song, Moonlight Sonata, the same piece she had played that night when everything changed. But now it sounded different. It wasn't born from desperation anymore. It was born from love, from healing, from memory. Each note told a story. Of a mother who believed in her child. Of nights spent alone under streetlights. Of a challenge turned into destiny. Her fingers moved like light, every touch precise yet filled with feeling. And in that vast hall, people sat completely still, listening not just with their ears but with their hearts. Among the audience, Mr. Dalton sat in the front row, his eyes glistening, his hand resting over his chest. Beside him were other children from the Harmony Foundation. Watching their friend, their role model, play for the world, he could see the pride in their faces, the same spark he had once lost but now found again through her. As the song reached its peak, Lena closed her eyes. She could feel her mother in every note, every breath, every echo that filled the air in her mind. She wasn't on a stage anymore. She was back on that rainy street, beside the woman who taught her that music could feed the soul. She could almost hear her voice again saying, "Play, my little one, and the world will listen." The final note lingered like a sigh. Soft and endless, the audience sat in silence, not wanting it to end. Then suddenly, applause erupted, loud, thunderous, unending. People stood to their feet, clapping, cheering, some wiping tears from their faces. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered words like genius and miracle. Lena stood slowly, bowing her head, tears shining in her eyes. But her smile was steady and calm. She wasn't overwhelmed. She wasn't afraid. She was home. Mr. Dalton rose too, clapping harder than anyone, his heart swelling with pride. When Lena walked off stage, he met her at the side, his eyes wet but smiling. "You did it," he said softly. "You made them listen." Lena laughed through her tears. "I didn't make them," she said. "The music did, it always does," he nodded, understanding perfectly. "You've given the world a gift tonight." She shook her head gently. "No," she said. "The world gave me a chance, and you helped me find it." He smiled and placed a small velvet box in her hands. She opened it to find a tiny gold pendant in the shape of a piano key, engraved with the words, "For the girl who played her way into our hearts." Lena's lips trembled. She looked up at him, whispering, "It's beautiful." "It's yours," he said simply. A reminder that even when life seems silent, you still have music inside you. That night, after the crowd had left and the hall was quiet again, Lena sat alone at the piano once more, playing softly to the empty seats, her reflection glowing in the polished surface. The sound filled the hall gently like a lullaby to the past. Outside, the city lights sparkled against the dark sky. The same city that once ignored a hungry little girl now carried her name in its heart. She closed her eyes, smiling, whispering to the air, "We did it, Mom." And somewhere in the stillness of that night, it felt as if the universe itself paused to listen, as if the stars leaned closer to hear the song of the girl who turned pain into beauty, hunger into hope, and silence into music forever.